can pass over to Michael.
Okay.
So, noswaith dda pawb a chroeso I webinar Merched Cymru. So, good evening everyone and welcome to Merched Cymru's webinar. So, who is Merched Cymru? Well, for those of you who aren't familiar with the Welsh language, Merched Cymru means Women of Wales. We are a grassroots group of women from across Wales who are working to protect and strengthen the sex-based rights of women and girls. Our members and followers include women from different age groups, ethnic backgrounds, sexual orientations, abilities, and we have women of faith and those who have none. We are not aligned to any political party and we welcome a range of political perspectives. As part of the annual International 16 Days of Activism Against Male Violence Against Women and Girls, Merched Cymru presents 2 webinars. Today's is the first of that series. The 16 Days of Activism makes it clear that male violence against women and girls is perpetrated because they are women and girls, because of their biological sex. We believe it is imperative to be able to recognise and name this, especially when so many women and girls in the UK and across the world are subjected to male violence and abuse on such a massive scale. So my name is Ali Morris and I will be your chair for the event this evening. I'm on the exec board of Merched Cymru, as well as belonging to a number of other women's rights groups. I'm a qualified social worker and for the past 30 years I've specialised within the field of male violence against women and girls and public protection. I have a particular interest in fighting prostitution and pornography and the sexualisation of girls. So this evening we have 2 guest speakers, which will be followed by a Q&A session. The Q&A box will be open, so please put in any questions you may want to ask our speakers. So our first speaker is Michael Conroy, also the founder, So we are thrilled this evening to welcome both Dr. Tamasine Preece and Michael Conroy, co-founders of RSE consultancy Humanise. So they will talk about the importance and challenges of engaging effectively with boys when learning about issues surrounding male violence against women and girls. Our first speaker is Michael Conroy, also the founder, trainer, and training programme designer for Men At Work, a community interest company. Michael worked in secondary education in England for 16 years until 2021, delivering a wide range of citizenship and wellbeing programmes for students in years 7 to 13. And in recent years, he has developed a training programme for educators, social workers, and youth workers in unpicking social influences on the values and beliefs of boys and young men so that they can exercise positive autonomy in being safe and being safe to be around. To date, over 1,000 professionals have engaged with the training. So welcome, Michael.
Thanks very much, Diolch yn fawr, and nos da, and I won't go any further because I'll just get lost really quickly. I'm off to Carnarvon tomorrow, actually. I'm doing a lot of training in Wales in the serious violence reduction funding, I think, from Home Office. So I've been doing 12 days in North Wales recently. So maybe I should learn a bit more. Well, thank you, Ali. Good to see you. Apologies for whatever happened. Anyway, that's boring, so I'm going to stop talking about it. You can't see the slides, so I'm just going to, I can see them, which is at least something. And I tell you, they're brilliant. Absolutely superb. But anyway, I'm Michael, and I do training for teachers, social workers, youth workers, anybody really who works with boys and young men. That's the breadth of the offer. Do you work with boys and young men, essentially? So that's it. Anybody will come through the door, whether that's online training or in person. It's actually in the last 3 years, I've trained nearly 3,000 staff now. Actually, it's rocketed. There's a huge demand, and we probably all know the reasons for that, but they'll look different in each setting. Anyway, so before I hand over to Tamsin at the end, and really look forward to questions, by the way, I will, please somebody, I can't see a time or a clock, please somebody tell me in 10 minutes time to start winding up. Please do that. I honestly, I really want you to. I'm in a flat. It's not my flat. Never been in before, and I'm in London for a conference tomorrow, so I'll just completely winging it. How do we constructively engage with boys and young men about being safe and safe to be around? That's interesting. That question there about safe. What does safe mean? It will mean different things to different people. The idea, just you might be interested to know this, that's the kind of strapline for my training, and the safe to be around bit can wind some people up. Or I can see, I've had comments. What do you mean safe to be around? What are you saying? That kind of defensive reaction. I just kind of roll right back and saying, well, do you want to be safe to be around? Whoever asks me that question, because I want to be safe in myself, and I want other people to find me safe it's safe company. It's not really that difficult. But it is interesting when it kind of raises that kind of reaction. That's the kind of not all men nonsense. And that, what do you mean by it? Well, I mean, do you want to be safe or not, mate? It's a simple question. But actually, it's quite a complex route to safety. So the aims of the programme, I've got a programme called 12 Dialogues. It's basically that. It's 12 constructed conversations to try and find a way to have good conversations with boys and young men. Typical ages 13 to 18. That's how it seems to have rolled over the last few years. I've used the materials with adult men as well, because I also work sometimes with adult male perpetrators of DV. So I've used some of these materials, and it's interesting how they are very adaptable. And I'm also working on a primary version. And the primary version isn't that different either. I'm a primary school version for year 6, doing some pilots in Lancashire quite soon with that. So it's 12 Dialogues. It's a way of having conversations, somewhere to start. What the aims of it really are to support professionals who work with boys and young men. And that's a lot of people. When you think about it, it's a huge number of people. It's giving them a conceptual framework for work they feel they know they need to do. We know we need to work with boys for all kinds of reasons. And yes, I'm talking about boys, although we're talking now 16 days of activism about reducing male violence against women and girls. But it's male violence, so we have to talk with our boys and young men. There's no mystery to that. So I focus on boys. I start with boys because we are the start of problems. Not that we are inherently bad. I don't believe that for a second. I don't believe in any kind of religious preordained nonsense. But we just, the evidence tells us that, and we start from an evidence base. So what way do we think about this work? Is it punishment? Is it trying to defuse a bomb? Is it trying to damage limitation? Or is it actually to try and support boys and young men develop healthily and have really good lives and really good relationships with their friends and their families and their kids if they have kids, and their partners who are women ostensibly, or whoever their partners are? Do we want them to be safe, and understand safeguarding, and also to have high expectations of themselves and of friendships? And these open up some really complex questions, don't they, if we ask these basic questions? But what is really, I think, a real challenge, I think, is working with, certainly with schools, is they are prone to knee-jerk, or they are prone to ignoring things because they don't have the time. I know that. I was in school for many, many years. But they're also prone to knee-jerk responses because they feel the pressure of having to do something. And sometimes doing something is worse than doing nothing. And I'm sure, in the detail of what Tamasine is going to say, we find some very elegant and effective and nuanced ways of doing that. But they need support because they didn't sign up to do this. You're a geography teacher, maths teacher, French teacher, and suddenly they've got this extra kind of world of expectation put on them. So, I want to support them because I know it's a tough gig. But also, they do have a lot of contact with boys and young men, and we want them to make that count and be good. I would say an effective programme has to acknowledge accurately where we are, what the need is, what we need to talk with our boys and young men because X, Y, and Z. What is X, Y, and Z? What are they? What are the problems? What are the issues? Now, I would suggest a holistic approach to that is really effective. And the issues facing boys and young men are multiple and complex and almost always affect women and girls, some more than others. Don't need to tell you that, no doubt. But diving in with boys and talking about what's happening in their lives, where are they getting their information from? What are the issues? How does it feel? What are the pressures? What's this? What's going on? I'm 56, I think. I think I'm 56. I've forgotten. I might be 57. But when I was their age, 13, 14, everything was so radically different. It's laughable for me to try and make any meaningful comparison. Pre-internet, pre-mobile phones, pre-ubiquitous pornography. These things are pre-algorithms. These things are wildly different to what I grew up with. So you have to be humble in this work. I think even if you're in your 30s, 40s, late 20s, even 30s, it's a different world for every 10 years. We're seeing some huge shifts, and I think Tams is going to pick up on that, perhaps even talking about AI at the current kind of surging wave of that. So an effective program, in my view, has to be realistic. Now, one day I might be working in a public school, i.e. a private school. Aren't we weird in Britain? And the next, possibly young offenders or gang work, or a primary or a rural crew. I mean, so diverse, so many teachers, so many social workers, so many youth workers in mixed groups or in single groups. Their issues are different. If you're in central Birmingham or London or Manchester, you're going to be talking about, gangs and the extreme situations there. But I was over in Northern Ireland not so long ago. They were talking about boys being groomed into paramilitary affiliation. And that's on top of everything else, So, I think acknowledging the diversity of boys and young men it's not just nice. We have to do it. There's no sane option. That alternative, you've got to do it. They are wildly different, just as women and girls are wildly different. We are, 49% of the world's population. How could we not be? And yet we are, I would say, invited to flatten ourselves and to shrink and limit ourselves by codes of masculinity that will be differently nuanced in some socio-economic or socio-ethnic religious context, however you want to phrase it. And therefore, having a program that is not responsive to that, doesn't recognize that, I think is pretty doomed. So it's in no way a set of instructions. It's not a lesson plan. It's a series of questions. And ultimately, it comes down to this. Tell me what it's like to be you. Tell me more. Keep telling me. I'm really interested. That's difficult, though, because where do we have space for that? Where does it exist? It's a really big problem because our schools are not set up for that. We've got other spaces, but they're under intense pressures. So it's a perfect storm, of course, as many of you will be only too aware of. So what's the problem? Let's name it. Let's dive in and acknowledge that it will be different in different places. And then find out, maybe we need to be smart. Who has these conversations? How often? How long do they last? When are they timed? The nitty gritty of getting into it, And also, really importantly, what do we not want to do? And I find negative planning really useful. I don't want to alienate, don't want to judge, don't want to assume, don't want to shut down thinking. I want to open thinking because, dangerous thoughts, they need some sunlight and some fresh air. Otherwise, they fester. And boys and young men will always find other voices online largely, but not only, who will listen to them and who will give them appear to give them their support. And we know where that can lead in terms of inceldom, far-right extremism, Islamic fundamentalism, misogyny, running throughout all of those things. Misogyny is the one thing that binds all these guys together. And then, we want to be thinking, what would good look like? what is an impact? What is a positive impact? What can we take heart from? So I realised I'm not I'm not going to get through many of these slides, and it doesn't matter because you can't see them. Hopefully, I'm making some kind of sense. But just to state that there is a huge demand for constructive work with boys and young men, but in amongst that, there are all kinds of approaches, and I would say a shonky business really has grown up around that, about people coming into schools, for example, charging, I don't know, £1,000, £2,000 for a few hours or a day, and then going away. That's it. There's no relationship there. There's no trust. There's no familiarity. And more importantly, the staff have not been upskilled. They don't have any more confidence to have those conversations than they did the day before. So I think that's a rather cynical business model. And hopefully, just explaining what I do, it's all about upskilling people who work with boys and young men, social workers, youth workers, early help, edge of care, youth offending teams, some police, not so many, but some mental health workers, counsellors, teachers, of course, in their many hundreds, mostly secondary, but into primary. And they are, I would say, I don't know if Tamsin will attest to this, and a knowledge of lots of teachers also, crying out for something solid, something concrete that doesn't come across as a absolute kind of attack on boys, because that doesn't work. It doesn't work, and we want it to work. All that matters is what works. That's a really interesting thing that I've learned from working with adult male DV perpetrators. The most important thing is week 2, that they come back after the first week. It might not sound very ambitious, but if they don't come back, if you haven't built that modicum of a rapport, nothing will change. There is no hope for it. And that was very sobering. I find that very sobering. I could have done with knowing that a lot earlier in my life. The absolute cruciality, if that's the real word, of genuine collaborative work with people whose life experience is very different to my own or one's own, but working together towards reducing the likelihood of harm. And I think sometimes we've got problems with parents and carers because of cack-handed kind of approaches by some zealous staff in some institutions or the media, lobbing phrases like toxic masculinity around, which I think are absolutely catastrophic. They don't work. They're not strengths-based notions. And strengths-based notions are, we have to do something positive. We have to build something. We have to reflect it back with the young men we're talking to, give them a chance to see the future and to work towards it. And I think that we can easily kind of break things by careless use of jargon. Anyway, it's not what I planned to say, but I don't think I've ever said what I ever planned to say in any circumstance. So that's nothing unusual. Hope you found it vaguely interesting anyway, and I do look forward to questions. Oh, I can't hear you, Ellie.
Oh, me this time. Thanks. Yeah, so something I just picked up on what you said, which was really important, I think, is that you said that boys are not inherently bad. So I've heard over the last year or so that there's been a lot of talk around when you're working with young boys about not demonizing them because you're already putting them on that path, but it's difficult, isn't it? Because we know from such a young age, boys are now actually displaying behaviours which they wouldn't have done years ago until they were older men. So I think there is a fine line, and I know, and I've heard you were fantastic at doing this, that there is really a fine line in around demonizing them and supporting them. I won't ask this question now, you can say it later, but that must be a very difficult thing to do when you know young boys are actually displaying behaviours that are actually
younger and younger,
abusive already. So
terrifyingly young. They've been adultified by a society that is not fit to have them, basically. And the girls
thank you. That was so interesting. I'm sure we've got a couple of questions already for you.
Great.
So I'll obviously bring those in at the end.
Brilliant.
So our second speaker, and she's disappeared, but is Dr. Tamasine Preece. She's curriculum lead for Health and Wellbeing at a secondary school in South Wales. And she's founder of See What Works, troubleshooting and consultancy for health and wellbeing, PSHE and RSE. Tamasine is a member of the expert panel for national charity Internet Matters. And as an advocate for the teaching of pornography through the lens of exploitation, consults regularly for US not-for-profit organisation Culture Reframed on matters relating to relationship and sex education. So welcome, Tamasine.
Thank you, Ali. I've got a house full of kids and dogs. So, oh, wow, you can see my presentation. That's fantastic. Great. Okay, so I've got a house full of kids and dogs. So it is what it is. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on a Monday evening. That was quite dramatic, thunder and lightning earlier, wasn't it? And it all seems very topical on the day for the elimination of violence against women and girls. So obviously, I work closely with Michael. I'm excited to travel up to London, well, separately from him, and speak for Insight Westminster tomorrow on a related subject. But what I'm going to be doing is just picking up some of the strands that Michael introduced there, and just really thinking about what are the implications for women working with boys to understand vowed RSE. I am a teacher of 23 years. I'm speaking in a personal capacity today, but I am going to be referring, of course, generally to some of my teaching experiences. Now, am I able to move my slide on, or do I have to do the whole COVID? Next slide. There we go. This work is nuanced, and I think there are a few things that we just kind of have to get out of the way before we start thinking about how women can effectively work with boys to understand these really difficult issues. Because at the end of the day, this work falls onto the shoulders of women. I know we're going to be at that conference tomorrow, and I'm sure Michael, we should have placed bets on it, Michael, but I would say the majority of the delegates are going to be there tomorrow. The majority who will be there tomorrow are women. And in fact, until I made an introduction, Michael, we didn't have any male speakers. It was all women on the speaker list. And so this work falls to us, and it's really, really nuanced for a whole range of reasons. Children aren't adults. I think that's something I didn't put on my list there, but children aren't adults. Children are children, and they are trying to navigate this increasingly complex world, pornified world that adults have created for them. And I think it's just really important to take a step back there. The motivations of why a child does something are very, very different to those of an adult, and I think that's something important to get out of the way. So you're a female teacher, and you're standing there in front of the class, and you're going to do your absolute damnedest to help them to understand the topic of vowed RSE, and how, as Michael says, they can all be safe and be safe to be around. And of course, there's that straight away hands up, not all men, accusations being a lesbian feminazi. And that is because boys feel as if they're being blamed for something they haven't done, which I get. It's making sure that we create a culture in which that isn't the very first thing that they go to. Some boys are victimized by other boys. So there we are, especially as female teachers, talking to boys about violence that is perpetrated by boys and men. And yet there are going to be some boys in the classroom thinking, yeah, I'm also a victim of male violence from peers, and we don't seem to be talking about that. Some boys have experienced DV from their mother, and that is the fact of the matter. It's something of which I have professional experience, and that is something that we encounter. And so, again, if you're talking about vowed RSE, we have to make sure that every child in there feels there's a relevance and they feel emotionally safe. Some boys have been victimized by girls as well, so that's just a whole extra layer. So we're trying to talk about vowed RSE, and the boys sitting there thinking, and yet I've been treated like this by a girl. Some boys are scared of trusting their own judgment. It's something that came on the back of the old Andrew Tate stuff, isn't it? That boys are frightened to ask out girls now, or actually more so on the back of #MeToo, that you can't do anything now, and you can't. It isn't possible to ask out a girl or talk to a girl for fear of being accused of rape or falsely accused of rape. And I get that. Some boys think that discussion regarding vowed RSE is part of the conspiracy. They've been waiting for this lesson. So they've heard about it. They've seen that Australian school in which all the boys had to write letters of apologies to girls and so on. And they've been waiting for that female teacher who's going to come and perpetuate all of the lies and reinforce all of the lies that they've heard about boys being accused for absolutely everything. So, and the minute you start talking, you're part of the conspiracy, and that just means everything that Andrew Tate said was true. So with my slightly odd angle here, I'm trying to hold a phone and read off my laptop at the same time. Some boys have experienced DV and they're not yet ready to face the reality of their own experiences. And so in doing that lesson, you're actually asking a child to face up to the reality of something they've experienced from a male family member that they love. And maybe they're not ready to have that conversation yet. Maybe they're not ready to disclose. Maybe this is the first time their eyes are opening to what's going on. But that is an absolutely massive thing to happen in a classroom, probably for 60 minutes and then move on. Some boys have perpetrated abuse and they're not ready to be honest with themselves about the behavior that they have displayed. And again, that's a very sensitive thing, children on the defensive. Children are exposed to, and this actually ties in with it all being part of the matrix and the conspiracy, children are being exposed to very dysfunctional representations of intimate relationships and sexual behaviour through a range of media. And I was thinking, so I have a TikTok account that I use either for looking at dog training or for to research my lessons. So my algorithm is very, very strange, with a sprinkle of Meghan Markle and designing your autumn-winter wardrobe. But periodically, I will get one of the women, there are a couple at the moment, who are sexually exploited women, and yet their TikToks are incredibly sex positive. There's a woman who went up to Bonnie Blue, went up to Nottingham, offered herself up to any male who hadn't yet had sex to go and sexually exploit her. So these things are the way in which they're curated is very, very odd. Interviews with the father saying how proud he is of Bonnie. That is incredibly disconcerting and very, very strange for boys. So on one hand, they're trying to understand VAUD RSE, or in the case of my classroom, they're trying to understand pornography through a lens of sexual exploitation. And then at the same time, they're seeing women on TikTok saying, I'm really empowered by doing this. In fact, only yesterday, a BBC article on OnlyFans about how empowering it is. So hang on, which one's true then? Because actually one is an awful lot more palatable and one means you don't get to feel any guilt. So what a strange situation we're putting boys in. We have to be honest as well that the word feminism has shifted in meaning. I mean, what are we on, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th wave? But for many children, particularly boys, that word is heavily loaded. And in fact, if you were to get a boy and a girl, let's say a female 15-year-old and a male 15-year-old, their constructions of feminism might look very, very different to one another. So what does it really mean then? And yet, if you start doing this work, there'll be an assumption that you are a feminist, probably are, let's face it. But it's an odd thing for a boy who then will be looking at trying to position what you're saying through their own construction. Now, do you mind if we pop onto the next slide? And here is the outcome of some of the stuff we see. So, boys hopping onto YouTube and or filming teachers talking about VAUD RSE, and then boys standing up and destroying them with facts and so on. But these are 10 a penny. You can Google them and you can see all these feminist teachers being destroyed by facts. But also, even if they're not popping onto YouTube, I'm pretty sure some of these children are, Andrew Tate's, maybe that's the end of Andrew Tate, but whoever Andrew Tate's next incarnation is, or they're watching I've forgotten his name now, Charlie Kirk. He's destroying feminists with facts. So if we don't get this right, and we don't get it right in the classroom, we're just really shoving boys into very strange places where they are able to have these conversations. And let's face it, it's going to be Discord, it's going to be Telegram, it's going to be Reddit, it's going to be 4chan, if that's still about. It's going to be a strange, unsupervised place in which boys are just going to perpetuate one another's really poor knowledge and ill feeling. Go to the next slide, please. So in terms of tackling VAUD RSE, it is, of course, taught through the RSE programme generally, and there are two approaches. And I'm just thinking about everything that's landed on my desk, and I'm thinking about legislation, and I'm thinking about all the different policies I've seen regarding this. So they tend to be the factual, the data informed, maybe lists of behaviours. So there are 9 different types of abuse. There are 7 different types of abuse. This is sexual abuse. This is financial abuse. This is emotional abuse. So we get these lists of different types of abuse. And then the focus is very much on the law. I mean, quite rightly, law obviously should get a mention every time, but there's that focus on the law. Or it might just be on the law. For example, there's a consent project that goes into school and just works with children to understand the law. You've then got the second approach, which does tend to be a little bit more ambiguous, or let's face it, very ambiguous about the harms of porn, perhaps because of fear of alienating children, or as facilitator or the charity doesn't want to position themselves as being like anti-sex or so on. So perhaps we might call this a sex positive approach. It tends to be peer, so younger adults educating children, and informed by pupil voice, so children contributing to the curriculum and having to think about what they know. And so within my own school and in my school prior to this, I've completely constructed my own curriculum for my children. But these tend to, if you're getting an off the peg, which, as Michael says, schools are absolutely desperate for, they will reach for something, and it's probably going to be one of these two types. Or if you ask an organisation to come into school, it's probably going to be these two approaches. Now, this is where I'm going to share a few of the techniques that I use, but I very much, is it Dr. Seuss? Feels like it should be, but that phrase, like, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? Because absolutely we should be able to go in and say, right, this is abuse, these are the statistics, this is what it looked like, these are the perpetrators. But actually, no, you're not going to get results like that at all. So you might be right, but in terms of happiness, your happiness will suffer because you'll be called a lesbian feminazi, and also you've lost your students. And that's a very dangerous thing, because if they're not talking to you, they're talking to someone, because children are going to find out information somewhere. And do we want it to be accurate, or do we want it to be ideological? So this is what I find works. Oh, next slide, please. Sorry. I tried to move on the Zoom. Right. So all RSE in general, so all RSE, everything that we're looking at, whether it's vowed RSV or anything else, in my opinion, and these are obviously values that I believe I share with Michael, should always be biologically and legally accurate. There should be absolutely no ambiguity. Any child, the classroom being completely inclusive, any child, regardless of home language, regardless of ALN, every child should be able to take part in an RSE lesson and completely understand what's going on, leaving the room with a clear understanding of the sex body and also of the law as it relates to sexual behaviour. RSE should be contextualised. So this is something I added on after, and we're using a different version here, but it should be contextualised. RSE isn't an abstract subject. It's not a one-off. It's not a drop-down. It should be part of day-to-day bread and butter. Consent isn't one lesson. Consent is a million little lessons. It's a million little conversations, considering consent across a range of contexts. RSE should create opportunities for critical thinking. Being able to apply new knowledge, as I say, to a range of contexts, but thinking about things like gender stereotypes, thinking about how gender stereotypes relates to a whole range of issues, whether it's sexual behaviour, whether it's violence, whether it's body image, but there's just a reinforcement of critical thinking for gender stereotypes from a young age all the way up then to them thinking about how they behave in intimate relationships. And media analysis, of course, because without media analysis, there's going to be no understanding of pornography. It's my view that all RSE should be porn critical. I see pornography as not just a public health crisis, but an absolute humanitarian crisis. I don't think pornography brings anything good into any child's life. I think our children are far, far too good for porn. So what we need to be doing is disrupting pornography and its insidious messages through porn critical RSE, in which every single opportunity there is to undermine the pernicious messaging of porn should be exploited, whether it's thinking about body image at a young age, or just thinking about adverts or gender stereotypes, or whether it's with older children thinking about the abuse that's perpetuated. I mean, these can be done in very appropriate, age-appropriate conversations, just in terms of we never ever hurt someone if they're in an intimate relationship. That is disrupting one of the messages of pornography. And I always teach about porn through a lens of exploitation. So with year 9, I consider a whole range of different types of exploitation, and then we narrow it down to sexual exploitation. It's sexual exploitation sits on the shelf alongside every other form, whether it's forced labour or domestic servitude or sweatshops. It's up there with all of them, and yet it's the one where we don't have any doubt about the abuses that goes on in sweatshops, and yet there seems to be but maybe they're enjoying it when it comes to sexual exploitation. And it should be mindful of everyone's right to be safe. Every child in that classroom should feel that the lesson is for them. It's not about already being divided into boxes of victims and perpetrators. They should feel an ownership of the lesson, that it belongs to them. It's their, I hate the phrase safe space, but it's their safe space to have conversations about things which are going to be highly relevant to their lives. So do you mind if we pop to the last slide? So what works? What I find works? So I've in my current role for 17 years. What works is exploring the same theme across a range of contexts. So gender stereotypes in relation to body image, gender stereotypes in relation to mental health, gender stereotypes in relation to puberty, exploitation, and so on and so on. That drip, drip, drip of messaging. It starting with a broad theme of violence. So this not coming from you, but this coming from the children themselves. What does violence look like? When violence is happening? Where is it? What's it look like? What are you afraid of? Who's most likely to be the perpetrator and in what context? Who's most likely to be the victim in what context? Again, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? Front loading conversations by talking about boys, and then the boys will support you in talking about girls. But getting that, I think when we talk about violence against girls, some boys are sitting there waiting to say, what about the men? If you front load it with what violence against men looks like, what they're afraid of, the safety measures, how difficult it is to get out of a fight, how difficult it is when your peer group are trying to support you to fight, what language, which is very gendered, you get called if you're trying to walk away from a fight, get that stuff out of the way, and then you can turn it to what does violence against women look like and all of the safety measures that girls put in place. And it's really, really powerful stuff. And which takes us nicely on to the last one, getting all children to reflect on personal safety. They should be anyway. Children should be thinking about personal safety in the classroom anyway, but how it is a gendered experience and why that is the case. And again, who are they afraid of? And supporting reflection on the power dynamic, the sexed body. So consent should be a conversation for everyone, but just making boys aware of they have a bigger body. I mean, a couple of years ago, I played, it was some year 11 were about to leave and we had a free lesson. I asked them what they wanted to do and they asked if they could play children's party games, which I thought was lovely. And they wanted to play musical chairs. Now, these are children who'd been together since the age of 3, had gone all the way through primary, all the way through comp. And there they were just before they're about to go and do their GCSEs and wanted to play musical chairs. I had to stop because the boys in all of that time hadn't really considered how much bigger they were than the girls, and had to stop and talk to them about safety because it's like giving them a car, isn't it? And they have to learn how to drive it. But it hadn't really crossed their mind that perhaps on the rugby field, but when playing musical chairs with their female peers, many of whom they regarded as cousins, sisters, they were capable of actually being really of causing them harm. So just thinking about within a sex context, in terms of sex bodies are different and you can hurt someone, and with your body you can unwittingly create a space in which they're not able to tell you what they want to do sexually, or whether they the fact that they don't want to have sex with you. And that's again really powerful dialogue. And the role and consequences of gender stereotypes within relationships and how they coerce us into behaving in ways that go against our own personal values. And I think ending with values, we are preparing our children for relationship contexts that don't even exist yet. Michael mentioned AI earlier. If someone had told me at the start of my career I would have to do lessons on sextortion, AI, I never would have believed it. So sorry, I know I speak very fast, particularly when I'm excited, and I'm happy to share these slides with you, but really looking forward to opening up the conversation now. Thank you.
Thank you, Tams. It's always a pleasure listening to you talk. You're so passionate and knowledgeable about your subject matter, so thank you. So both, we've got a few questions that have come in. So I'll ask the first one of Michael. So Gwen asks, are there any differences in dealing with gay and straight boys?
Crikey. Yeah. Actually, that's really interesting because I no longer work direct. I'm leaning near my phone. Sorry, I look like a bloody giant or something. I'm not. I am within normal range of size. I don't work directly with boys anymore. I did that for 8 years. And I do work directly with adult men now, and I train adult men and women. And it's really interesting because that question really is for them. It's for them, and that's not a way to get out of it. If you know your boys, you know your boys. This is the model is different to thinking you've got a kind of a one size fits all. If you're a teacher or a youth worker or a social worker of a boy or a young man, that's for you to do. That's for you to work out. But yeah, I can just say, as a member of the public, yes, of course. However, I often have gay men in my training for whatever reason. Seems overrepresented in some social work, but then, so are women massively. When I started the work, I thought I'd just be working mainly with male teachers, and then I woke up and realised that that's not the world that I live in. That 2% early years are men, 15% primary are men, 24% secondary are men, 10% of social workers are men. This is like the reality, and there do seem to be, I don't know the science of it, there do seem to be always gay men in my training, which is grand, and we talk about that, but I always make the absolute obvious point is gay men can be misogynistic. Absolutely, they can. We know that. Everybody knows that. And they can be anti-misogynistic too. We know that. Everybody knows that. So it's an interesting one. Yes, I think a lot of the work that we covers homophobia explicitly. Because it's the language that Tamsin alluded to, the punishment language for men. If we think, what is punishment language for men? I don't mean just kind of insults. I mean shame words. I don't need to list them, but if we think about them, what are they? They're all about female sexual parts, or being a woman, or being a man who has assumed a cultural position of woman, i.e. a gay man. So talking about gay men and gay lads is always in the conversation. It's not specifically about them, but it's not specifically about straight lads either. It's about boys and young men. What is the world telling them about women? And it's telling straight lads things about women. It's telling gay lads things about women. What's it telling them? That's the question. So, and some people, occasionally over the years, people say things like, "Oh, it doesn't really." I'd say I'm working with a gay lad, and I don't think it's going to work with him. And you're thinking, what is he not being exposed to messages about men and women? Of course he is. Have a chat with him, see where it goes, see what he thinks about it. It might not be a brilliant answer, but it's what comes straight out of my head.
Thank you. Very interesting. I'm sure that's Gwen asked that question, so I'm sure that's answered Gwen's question.
Hope so.
The next one then, Tams, I'll throw over to you. So in relation to the demonizing/supporting aspect that was talked about earlier, and the problematic behavior of boys, do you suggest different approaches for males and females working with boys?
Yes, I think as a woman, it should absolutely be at the front of your mind, because I'd rather a woman didn't go anywhere near it than, first of all, put herself at risk because you make yourself vulnerable, don't you? And we've all got our own stuff. Yeah. In order for me to do the work that I do, I've had to open every emotional and mental drawer and have a good root around, and and you can't just go into the classroom to talk about these things where you are going to have, if you don't get it right, people denying it ever happens and that women lie, and you make yourself incredibly vulnerable if you do those things. So So first of all, you need to have done that work. You need to have had a good chat, even if it's just with your girlfriends, and kind of got it all out there. No skeletons really. And then in your approach, as I say, just front loading it with stuff that concerns boys, just being aware of what those things are going to be. And I'm really happy if anyone is considering working with boys in this area as a woman, because let's face it, it is women, and women trained by Michael. Just having those questions almost scripted in your head about what they're going to say. I taught a class recently who I just thought perhaps there were a lot of boys in there, much quieter girls. Sometimes the dynamic is just what it is, isn't it? And I was watching the documentary about Holly Newton, the girl who was murdered in Northumberland, and it just felt right to say, while we were watching it, I just wanted to point out about the male paramedic who dropped his shopping. He wasn't even on duty and ran to go and help us. It's a 15-year-old girl who was stabbed by a 16-year-old ex-boyfriend. So the male paramedic who ran to go and help Holly, and also the boy who followed down the alleyway and also got stabbed. just as in, because who do we want? I'm not a massive fan of role models, but who do we want boys to identify with? You know, and some classes you just feel it's necessary to do that. I hope when you continue to work with a class that won't always be necessary, but sometimes you do have to be a bit obvious in order for children to come with you. I think personally, I think we all agree that children should be able to understand these things just as they are, without thinking, what if it was your sister, what if it was your mother? But they are children at the end of the day, so sometimes even just spelling it out and helping children, boys, to feel good and feel something positive. So yes, you might sometimes feel you're compromising the message because we need to be talking about boys hurting girls, but we want boys to come with us, and we want boys to feel this is an open dialogue. And it's funny, when you do that, quite often the boys will then bring up things about boys or about violence, because they know that you've got their back. And that's all that really matters, isn't it? Because it's a right old mess we've got them into. We just, as Michael says, we just want them to come back the next lesson and know that they're going to feel okay, even if they talked about heavy stuff. I hope that answered that.
The next question then sort of comes on from that really nicely. So what about boys who see violence in the home? They must be living in fear and perhaps shame. Are you told by the school, assuming that they know about the situation? And does it change the way that you communicate with those boys?
Oh, yeah. Well, all schools should be trauma informed. That comes down to safeguarding anyway. Before you do this work, you prepare for it. So you're already in contact with a safeguarding team. You've met with the heads of year. You know who the impacted children are that you know of. I mean, we're not psychic. And if a child hasn't disclosed, they haven't disclosed. You tell children in advance that you're going to be doing this work. You send emails home to parents and carers so they know you're doing this work. So it isn't perfect, and what you do may trigger a disclosure, maybe not today, but maybe further down the line, or maybe the child doesn't know. It's just sowing a seed of, hang on a second, I've seen that behaviour myself. But we, as near as damn it, you put everything in place, including there being space for children to come and find you or find another trusted adult in school to talk afterwards. But you never go in cold. Everyone should know well in advance before this work's going to happen, whether it's your supporting colleagues or whether it's children.
Yeah. Can I just add a little bit to that, Ali and Tamsin?
Of course.
Yeah.
It's a really big part of at the end of the training that I do. We talk about who should be in the group, and it's really hard to get past the idea of it being a punishment or an intervention. But in my heart and my mind, this is for all boys, because all boys need to be safe and to be safe to be around. It's corny using that, but it's dead clear. They are just human beings, and they need to be well and safe and be given support. But because of our sexed bodies and because of our historical power imbalance, which is real, and anybody denies it is, we need to have a good chat at some point. Because of that, we do have to be aware of our strength and our stronger voice and our entitlements and privilege and all of that sort of stuff. But the problem is, I think, often with schools, not always, and they're a mixed bunch too, of course, is that it's seen as, how do we deal with the naughty boys? And the problem with that is it becomes at any part of the message, which I think is really optimistic and hopeful and humane, it's dismissed out of hand by the boys who take part, because they know it's punishment for them. But their parents also just see it as part of the same old same. And I try and really reframe this. This is about personal development. It's about mental health. It's about healthy relationships. It's about an understanding of the law. It's about accountability. It's about having high expectations of yourself and your peers. It's about being a critical thinker of the garbage they see online. All that stuff. That's positive. If I've got I always try and think, if the school hasn't told me, they're failing. If they have told me, and they've just dropped a line saying, we've got to deal with toxic masculinity, they're failing. If they've said, we notice, we're running a pilot course, we want to do a program, we can't do it with all the lads, we've got too many boys, but we're trying to work with as many as we can. We'd love it if your son took part. These are the benefits. This is what it's about.
you know, just taking a bit of time out and treating everybody involved with some respect. And then the buy-in is bigger, and the communication is better, and the boys don't feel like they're being set up to fail or to, is this a trick? Am I really in the naughty boys group? So there's a lot of work to be done, and you know, unfortunately, it comes back. Our schools were not set up for this. We're following the factory model still, aren't we? But the issues are very present in schools. In fact, sometimes the schools are where things are seen first. So the staff in schools know they've got these things to deal with, and they're feeling the bubbling temperature of the water getting hotter and hotter. But unfortunately, sometimes that propulsion can lead us to knee-jerk reactions. And I think that taking a few moments to think, how do we frame this positively, not as a trick, but honestly, as something that we want for our boys? We want them to live well and have good lives, and we want the women and girls in their lives to be safe, live well, and have good lives, because they are not separable. Unless, you know, unless we get, you know, I'm still waiting for Julie Bindle's he said apparently she's going to get men a quad bike, but where is it? Where's my tampon and then? I'll ask her. I know Julie, I'll ask her. But unless we literally live physically separately permanently, there is no alternative.
Oh, thank you, Michael. Unfortunately, we're running out of time now, so I'm going to have to bring it to a close. So thank you so much, both. It's been an incredible honour to hear both of you speaking so passionately about the work that you do, and I just want to thank you both for what you're doing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Men At Work also wants to thank everybody who attended tonight and obviously gave up your Monday evening. So we really hope that you did find it useful and interesting as well. And we're going to be sending you some information that's been discussed tonight, and hopefully the presentations as well.
Yeah.
So
I'll
keep your eye out for that. Please have a look at our website and social media if you haven't. Lots of information on that. On X, formerly Twitter, we're at Merched Cymru. On Facebook, just simply search for Merched Cymru, and we also have a website. Lots and lots of our information will be on there as well. So we hope to see most of you or all of you next week at our next webinar. So diolch yn fawr iawn am ddod heno.
Cheers. Diolch.
Thank you.